Every night, he meticulously inspected every corner of his perfect creation, but he couldn't see the one thing that was hidden in plain sight, the truth about himself. Ethan, a renowned architect at the peak of his career, stood on the 35th floor of his latest masterpiece. The skyscraper, a skeletal monument of cold concrete and exposed steel, was his sanctuary and his prison. He walked its vast, empty corridors, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence, a man dwarfed by the scale of his own ambition. Each line, each angle, each rivet was a testament to his obsession with flawlessness. He wasn't building a structure, he was building a fortress against a past he couldn't face, a past defined by a single catastrophic imperfection. His life was a sterile masterpiece of 16-hour workdays and sleepless nights, a monument to control in a world that had once spun so violently out of his grasp. His hands, once capable of sketching vibrant worlds, now traced the cold steel beams with an almost religious reverence. They were the hands of a man who had forgotten the touch of a crayon, the feel of a messy, joyful drawing. It had been 5 years since the accident, 5 years since his son, a small boy with a big imagination and a love for bright colors, had been taken from him. The park, the fragile swing set, the small floor he should have seen, it all replayed in his mind like a silent film. The perfection of his blueprints became a desperate plea to the universe. If he could just control every variable, if he could make a world without error, maybe, just maybe, he could erase the one he couldn't fix. This building was his atonement, a towering denial of his grief. The air was heavy with the smell of cement and dust, a scent that was both familiar and alienating. He ran his hand along a freshly poured concrete wall, feeling the rough texture, the cold indifference of the material. This tower, so clean and so precise, stood in stark contrast to the beautiful, chaotic messiness of his son's artwork that was now locked away in a box hidden from view. He had become a ghost in his own life, a shadow moving through the emptiness, unable to find peace. The only thing that broke the monotony of grey and steel were the random splatters of colourful spray paint left by construction workers, small acts of rebellion against his perfect, colourless world. They were an annoyance he planned to have meticulously scrubbed away. As his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, it caught a flash of vibrant blue and yellow on a distant wall. It wasn't the usual haphazard splatter. This was a deliberate shape, a figure. He walked closer, his heart pounding with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. The mural was a simple, childlike drawing of a boy playing, his arms outstretched as if reaching for the sky. It was a violent splash of innocence against the brutal backdrop of his tower, and a wave of raw, unfiltered grief hit him with the force of a physical blow. The sea, drawing so out of place, so full of life, was a stark mirror to the emptiness he carried within. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the boy on the wall looking so much like a memory he tried so hard to forget. The colors, so bright and alive, seemed to mock the sterile perfection he had built his life on. This tiny act of defiance, this single drawing, was a wound ripped open. It wasn't just a scribble on a wall. It was a child's hand, a joyful spirit, a memory he had buried under layers of blueprints and concrete. His hands, the ones that could build skyscrapers, now felt empty, useless. He wanted to scream, to tear the drawing down, but he was frozen. If this touched your heart, imagine what's coming next. The tower wasn't just his creation. It was becoming a canvas for a pain he couldn't contain. The next night, Ethan returned, driven by a desperate, morbid curiosity. The drawing was still there, but now it had a companion. A son, bright yellow, with a smile that was both simple and heartbreaking. This intrusion, this beautiful chaos, was unacceptable. He pulled out a small notepad and a pen, but not to sketch a new building. He began meticulously cataloguing the imperfections of the graffiti, planning how to have it removed without a trace. He saw the child's drawing not as art, but as A flaw, a disruption of his perfect order. He drew lines, angles, and measurements around the playful figure, his hands shaking slightly, trying to impose his logic on something purely emotional. He believed that if he could just fix this, erase it, he could restore the balance he so desperately craved. He became obsessed. Each night he would find a new drawing, a house with a smoking chimney, a butterfly with asymmetrical wings, a clumsy, imperfect flower. Each one was a new invasion, a tiny piece of life bleeding into his sterile world. He started spending more time analyzing the drawings than the actual structure of the building. The perfect lines of his blueprints began to blur in his mind, replaced by the shaky, uncertain lines of a child's hand. He found himself looking at the drawings and then at his own hands, the ones that had held his son's hand, the ones that now felt so sterile and cold. Have you ever felt something like this? You're not alone. The mini cliffhanger of the unexpected graffiti was evolving into a full-blown emotional confrontation. One night, he caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows, a figure hunched over a wall, a can of spray paint in hand. His first instinct was to confront them, to demand an explanation, but he held back. He watched, hidden in the shadows, as the figure added a splash of orange to a drawing of a tree, creating a single bright, vibrant leaf. The movement was slow and deliberate, filled with a quiet concentration that was both surprising and oddly familiar. The person then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the lower floors. Ethan stood there, stunned. It wasn't a rebellious teenager or a street artist. The figure was short and hunched, moving with a weary grace. He had seen her before, but had never truly looked at her. The next night he was waiting for her. He saw her emerge from the shadows, her grey hair pulled back in a bun, her face lined with the wisdom of a long life. It was Maria, the elderly janitor who cleaned the floors and tidied up the dust left behind by the day's work. She moved silently, almost invisibly, but tonight she was a creator. She walked up to the wall with the drawings and began to add a small figure of a cat, its tail curling playfully. He saw her hands, old and wrinkled, move with a sureness that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. He had expected a vandal, an intruder, but what he found was something entirely different. A quiet, lonely artist who found her canvas in the desolate world he had built. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The graffiti wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of creation, born from a place of quiet solitude. He watched her for a long time, the silence of the night broken only by the soft hiss of the spray can. When she finished, she sighed, a small, weary sound, and simply stood there, looking at her work. There was no joy, no pride, just a deep, profound sadness. He saw it in her eyes, in the way she held herself. He wanted to ask her why she did it, but the words wouldn't come. He realized he was looking at a person who was just as lost as he was, an invisible woman in an invisible building. He approached her cautiously. "Maria," he said, his voice a low whisper in the vast emptiness. She flinched, startled, and then her eyes, so full of sorrow, met his. "You're a very good artist," he said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. She simply nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "They make me feel less alone," she said, her voice soft and raspy with age. "These walls, they're so cold. The colors, they bring a little bit of warmth." Her words were a mirror of his own thoughts. She was trying to fill the emptiness just like he was. Her art was her fortress, her way of fighting the silence. The tension was palpable. He didn't know what to do with this vulnerability. He, the man who controlled every aspect of his world, was confronted with a raw, messy emotion that defied all his logic. He wanted to turn and walk away, to go back to the safe, sterile world of his blueprints, but something held him there. The drawings, once an irritant, now seemed to call to him, to demand a response. He looked from her eyes to the drawing of the playful boy. and then to the sterile grey walls around them. For the first time, he saw not a flaw in his design, but a flaw in his life. The emptiness wasn't in the building. It was inside him. The next night, he didn't confront her. Instead, he brought his own supplies, a ruler, a pen, and a large roll of paper. He unrolled it on the ground and began to sketch. But instead of drawing a new skyscraper, he began to sketch a small, perfect swing set. He drew the precise angles of the frame, the curve of the seats, the exact dimensions of the support beams. He was fixing the world he couldn't save, trying to impose his order on a memory. He worked silently, intensely, his hands moving with a practiced, but now desperate rhythm. He didn't notice Maria watching him from a distance, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. He was so focused on fixing the past that he couldn't see the present. Maria, understanding his pain in a way no one else could, approached him slowly. She didn't speak. She simply sat beside him and watched him draw. His pencil moved with an almost frenzied energy, meticulously recreating the park from his memory, but in a way that was structurally perfect, a park that would never fail. He was so lost in his work that he didn't realize she was there until she gently placed her wrinkled hand on his. He flinched, his body tensing, but she didn't pull away. I can't draw away the pain," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know, I've tried." The words, so simple and so honest, broke through his defenses. He finally looked at her, truly looked, and saw the same deep well of sorrow in her eyes. It was a shared wound, a silent pact of grief. "My son loved drawing," he said, the words a raw, painful admission. He would spend hours drawing pictures of our house, of the park, always with bright colors. He always used to say that colors made things feel alive. His voice broke on the last word. Maria simply nodded, her hand still on his. "My son," she began, her voice a low murmur. "He loved to build things, little wooden boats. He would spend hours carving them, imagining they would sail across the ocean. He always said he wanted to be an architect like you." The confession hung in the air, a devastatingly beautiful connection forged in shared loss. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of their sons, with the unspoken ache of two hearts broken by the same kind of tragedy. They sat there for a long time, two lonely souls, in a massive, silent building, finally seeing and understanding each other. Maria then looked at his drawing, the perfectly rendered swing set, and then back at the messy, vibrant graffiti on the walls. "Your son drew with his heart," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And you draw with your mind. There's nothing wrong with that, but your heart needs to draw too." She then stood and walked over to one of her paintings, a simple drawing of a bird in flight. She looked at it for a moment, and then to him. "He was so full of life," she said, looking at the bird, "just like your son." He finally understood. Her drawings weren't just a way of coping, they were an act of remembrance, a way of keeping the memory of her son alive. The next night, something shifted. Ethan arrived at the building with a new sense of purpose. He found Maria standing in front of a particularly large, empty wall, a blank canvas of cold grey concrete. She looked at him with an unspoken question in her eyes. He walked up to the wall, his own hands now feeling a different kind of emptiness. He pulled out his pen and a small notebook, but instead of sketching a perfect structure, he began to draw a single, perfect line, a horizon. He then looked at Maria. She smiled, a real, genuine smile, and began to add a series of swirling, chaotic lines below his. It was a dance of two different worlds, his structured perfection and her messy emotion. What if this is the start of something beautiful? For the next few nights, they worked side by side. He would draw a perfectly straight line, a building or a window, and she would fill it with a riot of color and organic shapes. He added a window to her drawing of a house, and she added a garden of vibrant flowers to his. It was a beautiful, silent conversation between two artists, two parents, two people who had lost so much, and were now together, creating something new. They were not just painting on a wall, they were painting on their own grief, adding layers of color and life to the empty spaces within them. The concrete tower was no longer a monument to his pain, it was becoming a canvas for their healing. One night, Maria brought a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of her and a young man, a boy with a wide, bright smile. "My son," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of love and pain. He was 21. When he passed, he loved to build things. He wanted to build a bridge across the river near our home. She showed him the photo and then pulled out a small, old wooden toy boat. "This was the last thing he ever made," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan, in a rare moment of unguarded vulnerability, took out his own wallet and showed her a faded photo of his son. A small boy in a brightly colored t-shirt, his face smudged with paint. "He was 5, he said, his voice a whisper. "He was just a kid. He deserved to have a longer life." The wall became a monument not to their pain, but to their love. They were painting their sons back to life, honoring their memories in a way they couldn't before. Ethan's hands, so used to the sterile precision of a blueprint, were now covered in paint, a beautiful, messy rainbow of colors. He was no longer trying to control the world. He was letting it in, allowing the chaos and the beauty to exist side by side. He added a perfectly rendered bridge to the mural, and Maria added a small painted wooden boat sailing under it. They were building a world where their sons could meet, a world where the architect's perfect lines and the janitor's messy colors could coexist in a beautiful, harmonious way. The shared moment of vulnerability, the exchange of the photos, was a turning point. It was the moment their individual grief transformed into a shared journey of healing. He no longer saw Maria as just the janitor. She was a fellow traveler, a kindred spirit, a woman who understood his silent scream better than anyone else. He was no longer just the architect. He was a painter, a creator, a man who was finally allowing himself to feel again. The tower, once a sterile symbol of his pain, was becoming a beacon of hope, a vibrant canvas of life and love. The building wasn't being fixed, it was being reborn, just like him. He began to paint with her, not as a way of fixing her drawings, but as a way of collaborating with her. He used his skills to add depth and perspective, but he allowed her to choose the colors, the subjects, the emotions. He would sketch the outline of a perfect swing set, and she would fill it with 100 different shades of blue and green, a swirling, joyful mess of color. He was no longer a solitary creator. He was part of a team, a two-person crew on a mission to bring life to the desolate. He found himself laughing, a sound that felt so foreign and so right. It was the sound of a man who was finally finding his way back to the world. He felt the paint on his hands, a messy, beautiful reminder of his son's joy. He looked at his hands, no longer empty, but full of color and life. He wasn't just building a mural, he was building a bridge back to his own heart. The silence of the tower was no longer filled with the ghosts of his pain, but with the quiet murmur of two people painting and the echoes of their shared laughter. The building, once his fortress, was now his sanctuary. If this story is moving you, subscribe and join us for more journeys of hope and resilience. The mural grew, floor by floor, a vertical tapestry of life, love, and loss. Ethan and Maria were no longer just two people working together. They were a team, a family of two. They spent their nights painting, talking, and sharing stories about their children. The wall became a canvas for their memories, a living, breathing testament to the people they had lost. Ethan painted a small, meticulously detailed figure of his son in a bright blue t-shirt, running towards a perfectly rendered field of flowers. Maria added a small, whimsical butterfly, its wings painted in a chaotic, beautiful symphony of colors, landing on his son's nose. It was a perfect blend of their two styles, a beautiful marriage of control and chaos. One night, Ethan added a small but perfect archway to the mural, a beautiful detail that had no purpose other than to be beautiful. Maria looked at it for a long time, and then she walked up to it and, with a broad brushstroke, painted a small, vibrant red heart right in the middle of it. She didn't say a word, but her message was clear. His life, his art, his heart needed to be more than just perfect. It needed to be filled with love. Ethan looked at the heart, a simple, messy shape, and a tear, finally, after 5 long years, rolled down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, it was a tear of release. He realized that the heart wasn't just a part of the painting, it was a part of him, a part he had finally let back in. The final piece of the mural was a single, large image. A soaring bird in flight, its wings outstretched, carrying a small, beautifully detailed wooden boat in its beak. The bird was painted by Maria, its body a riot of color and motion, and the boat was painted by Ethan, its lines so perfect and clean they seemed to float on the wall. The bird was her son, flying free, and the boat was hers, sailing towards a new horizon. It was a testament to the idea that their children were not gone. They were simply on a new journey, and they, the parents, were finally ready to let them go, to honor their memories not with sorrow, but with life. The mural was complete. It was a stunning, vibrant masterpiece, a testament to the power of shared grief and the beauty of human connection. The sterile grey tower was gone, replaced by a monument to hope, resilience, and love. The cold concrete walls were alive with color and emotion, each brushstroke a story, each line a memory. Ethan stood back, his hands covered in a beautiful, messy rainbow of paint, and looked at what they had created. It was the most perfect thing he had ever built, not because it was without flaws, but because it was filled with so much life. It was a reflection of his own heart, which for the first time in a very long time felt full. Maria walked up to him and, without a word, gave him a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of a little boy holding a box of crayons, his face smudged with a wide, joyful smile. It was his son. Maria had found the box of his son's drawings in the box he had hidden away. He looked at the photograph and then at her. "You have to finish the last one," she said, her voice a whisper. "He would want you to." She handed him a single red crayon. He looked at the crayon, a tool he hadn't touched in 5 years. He looked at his hands, covered in paint. He looked at the mural, filled with life and color. He looked at Maria, his silent partner in this journey. He knew what he had to do. He walked up to the wall and with a single trembling hand began to draw a heart. It wasn't a perfect heart. The lines were wobbly, the color was messy, but it was real. It was his. It was a heart drawn with his son's favorite color, a heart filled with all the love and the grief and the hope he had finally allowed himself to feel. The crayon, so foreign in his hand, felt so right. It was a single, small act, but it was the culmination of his journey. It wasn't a perfect heart, but it was his. It was a heart that had finally found its way home. Maria stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, and watched him draw. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The silence was full of understanding and acceptance. They had both found a way to heal, not by burying their pain, but by bringing it to the surface, by turning it into something beautiful. The cold, empty tower was a place of warmth and connection. His blueprints, once so perfect and so sterile, now included a riot of color and life. He was no longer just an architect. He was an artist, a creator, a man who was finally at peace with his past. The story was not about the building, it was about the man who was building it. It was a story about how a single flawed drawing on a cold wall could shatter a perfectly constructed life and in doing so lead to a beautiful, messy, and real rebuilding. It was a story about a man who, by finally allowing himself to feel, was able to find a new purpose, a new way of honoring the people he had lost. The mural wasn't just a painting, it was a bridge, a connection between the past and the future, a testament to the idea that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a way to find light. He wasn't fixing the building anymore. He was finally finding a home in his own heart, but what he found wasn't just his son's memories, it was a new purpose. The tower, his monument to perfection, became a monument to imperfection, to the beauty of a flawed human heart. He was no longer running from the past. He was building a new future, one filled with color, life, and the messy, beautiful reality of love and loss. He had finally found his way home, not to a place, but to himself. He now spends his nights not inspecting the building for flaws, but painting with Maria, a silent pact of healing and remembrance. He has found a new way to use his skills, not to build perfect monuments, but to create beautiful, imperfect canvases for the human heart. The tower, once a sterile symbol of his pain, is now a living testament to his healing, a vibrant masterpiece of shared grief and resilience. He is finally free, a man no longer defined by his sorrow, but by his hope. The final shot is not of the mural, but of Ethan's hands, now covered in a rainbow of paint, holding a small red crayon. He looks at his hands, a faint smile on his face, the most beautiful, most imperfect thing he has ever seen. He has found a home in his own heart, a home filled with the messy, beautiful reality of life. The tower stands tall, a silent witness to a journey of healing, a monument not to what was lost, but to what was found.